Hi everyone, so we're going to get started, and this is a video I hope will be helpful to those people who are wondering, hey, do we really have to eat meat without blood in it? Do we have to take that step of getting kosher meat, and what does that entail, and what would happen if we don't do it, and all that? So I'm going to show you why this is the understanding of our apostolic church for sure in Acts 15. And we're going to see there's principles all the way going to Noah and the Mosaic Law as well. So we've got three levels of clear clarity to deal with. So let's first look at Noah. God commanded Noah that he and his progeny could not eat the blood of the animals which they ate for food. They had to completely drain the blood out of the animal before eating it. And we're going to see, we'll read now in Genesis 9 what we're supposed to do. God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon every. Can someone tell the bear next time that he's supposed to be afraid of me? I just want to be certain he got this message from God. So we know the animals don't obey God all the time. See, that's we just have to realize that. 3, every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything, but you shall not eat flesh with its life, with its blood in it. So that's a command to Noah and his progeny. And for your lifeblood, I will require a reckoning from every beast. I will require it from man. So anybody who kills man, God's going to require it, whether it's man or beast. All right, so let's keep going. These laws automatically apply to all humans, including Gentiles. Why? Because Noah and his family are the progenitors of the entire human race after them. Everyone prior to Noah was killed in the flood. Hence, this command about blood and meat is a universal command applicable today. Of course, it was repeated in Leviticus 7:27, verses 17, chapter 17, verse 14, Deuteronomy 12:16. The command to Noah and Moses explains why James decided in the conference in Acts 15, verse 29, that Gentiles must abstain from eating food with the blood in it. Okay, James said the following applies to Gentiles who accept Christ. Now, by the way, James is the brother of Jesus. He's not an apostle, but he was delegated, according to Eusebius, the authority over the church to act as its bishop in that administrative sense. But he's not a dictator. We can see he's a pretty mellow guy. So anyway, he says you are to abstain, talking to summarizing the instructions to be given to Gentiles. You're to abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, so you don't eat meat with blood in it, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. You will do well to avoid these things. Farewell. Okay, so that was the sum and substance. Acts 15, verse 29. However, some insist that Peter's vision 5 chapters earlier in Acts 10 about a blanket from heaven of unclean food necessarily means that the 12 apostles incorrectly in Acts 15 allowed James to impose a food prohibition on Gentiles eating meat with blood in it. This is wrong. In Acts 10, Peter sees a blanket of unclean foods that God supposedly, now this is another thing I didn't know when I wrote this, God didn't necessarily present this. He's in an ecstasia, which is what he didn't realize is an ecstasia is a improper way to get messages. That's a way that pagans in communication with demons would work. So this was one of those weird things where he is hearing a command to actually violate God's law. It says, you must eat this unclean food. And he says, no, I've never done that. He assumes it's from God. And we have a whole theory of why that happened. He was recently in contact with someone who equally had an ecstasia. In Acts 22 is recorded. Paul had an ecstasia, and he then immediately, Acts 22 records it, but it happened way back in Acts 9. And if you follow the events in Acts 9, is after Paul had this ecstasia in the temple, and he was told to flee and not see the apostles. He decides on his own, independently of what his own Jesus told him not to do. He decides, I'm going to go see them anyway. And then he has Barnabas introduce himself to the apostles. We don't see any reaction, positive or negative, which to me is a negative. No positive shaking of hands and let's do we're going to give you the Gentiles and we'll take the circumcision, and none of that happens. But the important thing is that Paul had just had an ecstasia, and he's coming out and shaking the hands, I assume, of Peter, Now, Peter is going to have an ecclesia within less than 6 or 7 verses in chapter 10. And in that message, he's going to have a vision in his head saying, eat unclean foods. Now, he says, no, I've never done that. So he refused the Lord. He refused whoever that was, and he called it the Lord. But that doesn't mean he was seeing correctly. He's in the middle of an ecclesia, an improper, so it's basically, demonic. That's what the demons use, is ecclesia. So the point being this is that he then makes the right conclusion later, and he says, no, that's not what I was commanded to do. So he's negating what he was told, and he says what happened was, right after this, Cornelius comes to him, and Cornelius is a Gentile, and God had directed Cornelius to come to him. And by the way, Cornelius doesn't know Jesus, doesn't know anything. He's a God-fearer. So, and Peter says, I've concluded that God accepts all those who seek him and love him and fear him. So this is another good example of the way we define salvation, and the way it works is God works with people where they are and where their heart is, and he's going to draw them to him, however that will happen. So we have to know there's not this clear-cut line where, if Cornelius had died without, accepting the facts about Jesus, which would be Paulinist would tell us that he'd go to hell because he didn't believe in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. I don't think so. I think we were to understand that he was already saved. God's blessing him. He's drawing him over to Peter. I don't think it would have mattered had he died and be struck by a truck or something on the way there. But that's just a speculation. I don't know. I'm just saying we see there's things going on in the book of Acts that kind of show us that we maybe have too regimented an idea of how salvation works between God and the universe, the people in the universe that he loves and wants to bring closer to him for his enjoyment. So anyway, I'm just saying that so that we understand that this was not a true command against eating, a command to eat unclean food. And that's the other crazy thing about it, is God's own word, unclean, clean, is the term for toxicity. And we're going to get into that in a little bit. So why would God give you command to eat toxic food, basically poison? So it's insane to think that ecclesia really was giving him anything but a demonic message, and he didn't pick up on it. Peter is seemingly slower than he should be. All right. Anyway, but he's a good man, a good heart. In Acts 10, he sees the blanket and so on and so forth. Okay. At the same time, some popular rabbinic traditions said Peter should not even touch a Gentile as supposedly unclean. And this is where he's going to see he thinks he knows what's the benefit of what the message really meant or could mean that would be within the confines of God's real purpose. So this tradition is not in the Mosaic Law itself. Then Peter realizes the true message of the vision in Acts 10, verse 17, was about Cornelius, not about the food laws. Peter says to Cornelius, after Cornelius bows to Peter, he says, stand up, I myself also am a man. So he doesn't want Cornelius to worship him, Peter. And while conversing with Cornelius, he went in and finds many having come together. And he said to them, you know how it is unlawful for a Jewish man to be joining or coming together with a foreigner. And I don't know what he means unlawful. It's not law. It's not in the law. And yet God showed me that I should be calling no person defiled or unclean. Therefore, having been sent for, I indeed came without objection. So I asked, for what reason did you send for me? I'm a little confused. Yeah, so this is Peter talking. What does it mean? Therefore, having been sent for, I indeed came without objection. I guess Peter's saying, I've come to you, although what it is Cornelius coming on over him. So anyway, this is confusing to me. Is Cornelius is coming over to Peter's house, but I think maybe Peter was on his way to go see Cornelius. He did know that he had received a message. So I guess he's walking out the door, and then Cornelius is coming in. So he's just referring to that kind of weird first meeting. Okay, the fact Peter 5 chapters later in Acts 15 agrees with the prohibition of eating blood in food. The prohibition of eating blood in foods is a second reason to know Peter did not believe the vision of the blanket was about food laws. Rather, as expressed in Acts 10, verse 28, Peter realized the blanket vision was about not calling a Gentile unclean, when God says he is clean, because God never says in the Bible that a Gentile was unclean to touch. No man should say otherwise. So that's why I don't like that it's there, because it makes it sound like that's in the law. And so maybe it's just one of those things that Luke maybe didn't understand what was said. Thus, if the prohibition against eating blood in Acts 15 is binding, and it should be, then it would show that in every age, the patriarchal, which is all the way back to Noah, the Mosaic, and the Christian ages, that the eating of blood for meat has been forbidden by God. Sorry. It is inherently wrong, although I believe it was wrong solely as a health law. So that's important. It's not like a moral, venal, evil sin. It's really a law intended for your benefit. And it's sort of like the Sabbath rest is intended for your benefit in some way. Jesus was saying the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. It's like, it's not that you're a slave to the Sabbath by having to rest. It is intended for your benefit. You should still seek to bless God and worship God on the Sabbath. But on the other hand, God is saying it is meant for man's benefit. So he's going to construe what should happen on a day through that lens. And through that lens, Jesus says we should do good on the Sabbath. That's something that we will enjoy, doing good and helping others, and feeding the homeless, and whatever we come up with that will be fun to do to help others. James Burton, in his commentary on Acts 1977 at 300, concludes that this is the case. As to Genesis 9 verse 4, he stated, this makes it clear that the denial of blood as food to man antedates the Mosaic law. Thus, they are wrong who see these restrictions as a symbolic binding of the law on Christians. The authority they have for Christians of all ages derives neither from Moses' law nor from the commandments of Noah, but from the authority of the Holy Spirit. Okay, so I just want to comment here. This is the absurd position we've finally gotten in this world. The Mosaic law is so horrific and so horrible, according to Paul in Galatians 3, that this guy couldn't actually say that the fact that's in the Mosaic law is all I need to know. He's got to go, it's not just in the Mosaic law, and we're not bound by the law, so we're going to go back to another law, as if that law itself is not binding, like it has a binding nature to it. So it's just, this is the craziness of Christian commentary today. But anyway, it's there. It's going to go away. God is going to get rid of it eventually, because it's just very I can't even say what it is. It's just not smart. It's just people who don't think what they're saying. Okay. So if you acknowledge your duty to obey either Genesis 9 verses 1 to 5, or Leviticus 7 verse 27 and 17 verse 14, or Acts 15:29, or all three, you should only eat meat that is prepared to be kosher. And so let me explain this to you. So something you can, I don't think God's going to strike you down dead if you don't do this tomorrow. I think God, like James said, they're going to learn. But the last thing he said, here's my commandments I want them to do, and including this one, don't eat meat with blood in it. But he's also trying to say is they'll go to the Sabbath each week, and they're going to hear the commandments, they're going to learn, they're going to grow. So God will give you a little bit of leeway here, but I think ultimately each one of us have to come to recognition here that these are commandments of God, and we have to treat them very seriously. And instead of if you are not going to follow it right away, you need to research carefully and make sure about it. And don't just leave it hanging and just don't resolve it and keep eating all your hamburgers, and so it's convenient. Okay, so, and believe me, I'm a big I lived at Hamburger Habit. I went every lunchtime for a couple of years when I had a Hamburger Habit moved right next to my office. I'm like, this is like heaven. I just get a hamburger every day, and they're delicious. And oh yeah, but there's a lot of vegan versions of these things. Sorry to tell you, but they're very good too. So anyway, non-kosher meat, even if drained, will still have at least the blood in the muscle tissues. Just so you know, even when you eat meat, it's going to have some. They do some things to try to drain out meat naturally, or use natural means. Just so you know, when you're buying it, they're trying to get rid of the blood in it, and there's a reason, because blood is toxic. The hemi-iron in blood is very bad for the human physical body. And so because of that, you don't ever even know this, but they wash all meat, most meats as far as I understand, they clean all meats with ammonia. So they wash it all down. They put ammonia all over it, which has the tendency to kill all bacteria. Then they wash it down with water again. I think they do a couple washes, and then they get it as clean of ammonia so you don't taste that. That's ammonia is disgusting, right? So that's what they do to help kill the blood, but they can never get all the blood inside the muscles. And that's the problem. There's still some toxic elements in it. It's not pressed out. It's not pressed or drained like, my Uncle Ralphie used to shoot animals, take me out for a hunt. I was in shock. I thought he was going to shoot something, normal, and he shoots an animal in front of me. But anyway, then he hangs it up on the in the he had a special place on his property, and he hung the animal upside down. He drained the blood for hours. So I mean, it's a natural thing. Hunters do these things, and so there are always efforts to try to get the blood out of it, just for health's sake. It's not good for us. But kosher is a real process. So I'm going to tell you what that process is. In kosher meat, the meat undergoes complete bleeding, and the meat is soaked in salt and water, which is so important in removing residual blood. So this is how this goes and gets the residual blood. Under the kosher tradition for home or the butcher, this washing and salting must be done 3 times on each piece of meat. So it can be done. It just takes time. And you have to use a coarse salt, not just regular salt. Coarse salt, not table salt, is necessary because table salt will actually be absorbed into the meat rather than stay separate and continue to remove the blood. So kosher salt is the type of salt to use. So you buy the kosher salt. It removes the blood rather than what happens with table salt, which is simply absorbed into the meat. Such table salt thereby retains the blood, so you don't get anywhere with table salt. Why would God prohibit eating meat with the blood still in it? Is there something in the blood of animals that is not good for us? So let's learn some science here. God has reasons, and it's explained by science. The Hebrew word for unclean is tomei, and it means it is toxic. It is polluted. So there's a YouTube video where the young man shows you some definitions and word meanings, and one of them is polluted, and then he then says, in English we would say that's toxic. It's polluted means it's got some filth or something harmful that's unclean. So literally, the word unclean isn't just this scary word. It's actually descriptive of the problem. It's dirty. It's unclean. It's got pollution in it. And the young man had a good idea. Just think of it as it's toxic. And in fact, that's what medical science now shows. It's toxic to humans. It's like poison, the blood in animals, if we eat it in any form. Did you know that there are meat additives added today to the non-kosher meat you eat to suppress the toxic effects of heme iron found in animal blood? And then I have a video link here, and I'm not going to play it right now. I might play it before we finish. Here is Dr. Greger's nutritionfacts.org website video on this meat industry practice. And so we could look at the video maybe. I don't want to make this too long. I'll see how long it is when I'm done this narration here. The National Institute of Health article Dr. Greger cites explains, quote, the major promoter of colorectal cancer in meat is heme iron via the N-nitrosation or fat peroxidation, dietary additives can suppress the toxic effects of heme iron. So that's what they do. They add to your meat when you're buying it. They're adding dietary additives to try to suppress these bad effects, but they don't get it all, and they can't get any of the blood that's deep into the muscles. And if you cut open your body, you cut down an inch, are you going to have blood in your muscles? Yes. So there's plenty of blood in the muscles, and it's not gotten out by the way they drain. The way they deal with blood in your animal meat, they're not able to get the blood in the meat in the muscles, because not all blood of the animal is removed from the non-kosher meat due to the presence of residual muscle blood, and this is conceded by Dr. Mercola, for example. Such meat industry additives are necessary to counter the toxic effect of the heme iron solely present in animal blood in non-kosher meat you eat. So is the necessity of such an additive a clue to what is the problem? The ill effects of meat in all modern health studies have one thing in common. All the meat eating examined, so all the studies you ever look at, nobody has ever done the study I want to see, which is compare the cancer rate of people who eat kosher versus the people who don't eat kosher. And I guess you could say the Seventh-day Adventist studies show their health is much, much better, a lot less cancer. So I guess you could say that study compares people who don't eat meat with blood in it versus those who do eat meat with blood in it. But I mean, I would like a real study. It's not, because the Seventh-day Adventists are very healthy eaters in a lot of other ways. So it's not maybe going to be determinative. So you need to find people who basically just eat kosher meat and otherwise eat like everybody else, but the meat they eat is kosher. I would love to see that study and see how their health is. But anyway, so the ill effects of meat in all modern health studies have one thing in common. All the meat eating examined involves eating meat that has not been drained or purged of all blood. The chicken or beef you eat has lots of traces of blood along with its hemi iron, unlike kosher meat. The blood in meat is apparently the likely culprit in meat for all of its ill health effects. Numerous scientific studies support meat, including fish, actually non-kosher prepared meat, are actually related to the leading 18 causes of death in the United States of America. They're causally related to the leading 18 causes of death in the United States of America. Dr. Greger's book, How Not to Die, as Dr. Greger explains at one of his web pages, those eating meat-free diets don't get any of the hemi-iron found in blood and muscle, which may be a good thing. The avoidance of hemi-iron may be one of the key elements of plant-based protection against metabolic syndrome and may also be beneficial in lowering heart disease risk. Notice there's a lot of maybe and could be and all that. So he's not saying it definitively, okay? But here's my point to you. A, we know God calls it toxic. It's him telling us it's poisonous. We've got the doctors telling us it may be, and there are correlation studies, which means causation does appear to be inferable between the eating of meat and the increase of cancers and all kinds of 18 top leading causes of death are all have this factor in them. Is the people who eat more meat, and usually they're always meat with blood in it, have much more incidences of causes of death of the 18 top causes of death. Okay? It appears that God knows best. By removing all traces of blood in meat, you have removed what is harmful to your health in the meat. Then apparently you have rendered irrelevant all the studies that show eating meat, always presumably non-kosher meat, increases substantially the risk of death from heart disease, cancer, etc. But until you eat only kosher prepared meat, you are not only violating God's laws, sorry to be a party pooper, but also you are endangering your health. So God has good reasons for this. He designed the animals, and you say, well, why did he design it so that we can't eat it? Because ultimately, it tastes good, it's wonderful, don't we love the meat? That kind of thing. Well, it's his world. He created it. He gave rules. He made allowances after the flood. Of course, there was no vegetation, so that made sense then. People got hooked on the meat. He basically said, okay, press this blood out and you can eat it, that kind of thing. So he's tried to get us to do the thing that will modify the meat to be reasonably healthy. And like anything else, you're taking more risk if you go that route of eating meat eating kosher meat, which is completely allowable under the law. So you don't have to go without eating any meat. I'm just saying, even with kosher meat, you're still probably getting a little bit of exposure to hemi iron. So if you wanted to, you could just eliminate meat. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so listen to your heavenly Father, and you will prolong your days. He says in Deuteronomy 5:33. Jesus said, you are not morally defiled by eating food God prohibits as unclean. That clean versus unclean terminology did not signify it was immoral to eat, but rather that it was unhealthy to do so. Yet even though you commit no moral sin in eating meat with blood in it, it is still a command from your Father in heaven about something he hates you to eat. He intends for you to respect such command for your own good. So why violate a health-based food law now that you know your Father's aim in prohibiting such food was to protect you from something potentially very deadly, which will shorten, not prolong your days? So there's other arguments I could tell you about what, the vegetarian versus non-vegetarian issue. So, but we're not going to get in that today. I want to tell you one other very interesting, important thing. Look at this study note, and this is amazing. Chlorophyll, just so you know, is one of the most amazing molecules in the world. It's able to absorb light synthesize it using quantum computer physics inside of it to do protein synthesis of sapping all the energy it possibly can out of all the molecules by suspending them in a state, multiple states of existence, so that they can get a 96% production of energy from every particle of sunlight. I mean, chlorophyll is basically the most well-designed molecule in the universe. And just imagine, you look at our solar panels, and we're getting like a 16% efficiency of converting each photon of sunlight, and the little chlorophyll, the supposedly evolved thing, is running a quantum physical experiment every second. By the way, I've got to do video on that one day, because the scientists, who you can find it on YouTube, they're amazed. The chlorophyll, how does it do this? It's a quantum computer inside of a little plant with no mind. It's doing amazing things that are well beyond the capacity of this living thing. How does it do that? How does it have a quantum computer? But anyway, here's what's so amazing. So he says the green vegetables inhibit hemi-induced toxic effects, according to a July 2005 article. And he actually said you can sometimes see, if you're out in the sun and you put your arm out and you've eaten food that has chlorophyll in it, you can actually see the sun can activate through your skin the chlorophyll. So those molecules with the quantum computer are still alive and active inside your body. The chlorophyll doesn't die right away, and it's doing something. It's like a machine in there with this amazing computer inside of it healing you. And so vegetables do a good job, green vegetables in particular. So I recommend you get your sunshine and you get your chlorophyll. And so if you are eating a kosher meat with the blood in it, you still have some toxic effects from the blood. And so it's a good idea to eat green vegetables and get some sunshine. Okay, so I think that's it.